I spent the day as a 1940s housewife, and here's how it went. To research this video, I consulted an article published on the Glamour Days website November 6, 2015. It follows the lives of two women in 1941, one in wartime Britain and the other in pre-war America. Their names are Jane Amberg and Olive Day, and Olive is the British woman, and so it's her routine that I followed, as well as my own research over the years on British civilian life in the 1940s. I woke up at 7 a.m. and I slept with my gas mask, torch and book handy in the event of having to make a quick dash to the air raid shelter during the night. I opened my curtains to let some light into my room, and then I began making my bed. Usually, one would not leave the house without making your bed first, as it puts you in the right mindset for the day ahead. And then I popped on my slippers and robe, and it was very typical for a woman in the 40s to wear a robe around the house. In fact, she'd rarely be seen without one. And also, a good pair of slippers were a staple in a traditional 1940s British home. As you can see, I've also slept in rollers to help my hair curl overnight, and I've added a headscarf to keep everything in place. I then walked down my stairs into my kitchen and let some light into the kitchen as well. Before collecting the milk and newspapers. And like any British person to this day, I start the day by putting the kettle on. So for my breakfast as a 1940s housewife, I'm going to have a single slice of toast with margarine and jam. Now for the bread, it would usually be the national loaf, which to be honest, nobody was really a fan of because apparently it tasted a bit like cardboard, but I'm going to be having a single slice of bread. And for the margarine, obviously we're living on rations at the moment, so you'd get about 4 ounces of margarine a week, so it's going to be a slither. And for the jam, you could only hope to have jam in your pantry if you grew your own fruits and vegetables and made preserves. So you'd probably be looking forward to jam probably a pound every 2 months, unless the Women's Institute, the amazing Women's Institute, were able to provide some jam to your local area. An alternative for jam though might be carrot marmalade, which doesn't taste as bad as it sounds. Families would ordinarily have a family bread bin where they keep all their bread, of course, and I'm also going to have a cup of tea. Now, when it comes to tea rations, you'd get about 2 ounces of tea a week, which is about 25 tea bags. So today, I'm going to treat myself. and you've got to let it mash. It is pretty much sacrilege if you don't. And if there are people out there who are like, oh my gosh, you put the milk in first. Yes, I did. And do you want to know why? Because traditionally you would put the milk in first to try and protect the china from cracking. And believe me, it still makes a lovely colour. I then enjoyed my tea and toast whilst reading the morning papers at the breakfast table. I feel like I'm doing some sort of 1940s mukbang. That could be a thing. And then began my house chores. I start by shaking a duster out of one of the back windows, and every visible window of my house and the houses alongside me would usually bear witness to the air raids that have occurred in the last few weeks. In wartime Britain, there would usually not have been a window that remained unaffected in some way, and all would be either fully or partly boarded, have had broken glass replaced by oiled linen, or have existing glass crisscrossed with tape. Before going to work, I spend an hour or so on the housework. Now, ordinarily, I wouldn't have actually had a stair carpet because all carpets would have been removed and asbestos laid in their place. This was in an attempt to combat fire bombs. Having made my bed, I then polish the banisters and then clean out the fireplace, carefully separating cinders from ash because the cinders are reused and the ash is used for fertiliser in the garden. I think one of the things that I've noticed about living like a 1940s woman that I really admire is spending an hour on housework and chores before you even leave for work. Like, that is just, it's so admirable, and it makes so much sense because when you do come home from work, everything is done. And I would like to say that I get up early and get loads of things done before I even leave the house, but I don't. And more often than not, I leave my alarm to the very last moment before I have to get up. But to do all of this before you even leave the house, it makes total sense to me, but I can't imagine myself doing that because I have an early start for work. So setting my alarm like an extra hour and a bit before then to be able to have breakfast and do all the chores that need doing, I wish I had that kind of discipline. It's also kind of solitary because a lot of women in the 1940s, their husbands or their fiancés would have been at war. So if they'd already moved into the marital home and then their husbands were shipped off to war, they would be spending a lot of time alone. And I love being alone. Like, don't get me wrong, it gives me a lot of peace to be on my own. But I also like to be around people. Like, I like having my mum in the house so that I can talk about my day or anything that's worrying me. Obviously, you know, these days my partner is just a phone call away, or I can message somebody. But if I was living in the 1940s alone because my husband just wasn't here, I wouldn't be able to speak to people that accessibly unless I had a good relationship with my neighbours. And that must have been really, really hard at times, especially when you were afraid or, at night, during the blackouts. Can you imagine going through that fear all by yourself and not being able to just call your mum? Oh, that's the bit that's actually struck me the most, is just being alone a lot of the time. I really admire these women. Like, they were made of seriously strong stuff.
And with all my housework done, it's time to get ready for work.
Now, I don't know if you've ever slept in pintails, but I tell you, it is not comfortable. But sleeping in some sort of rollers to curl your hair overnight was pretty common. And then adding a headscarf over the top to keep everything in place was pretty common. And a little side note, if you use a silk headscarf, your hair was less likely to frizz. So as you can see, everything has stayed in place, and so I'm going to let these curls down. And in the 1940s, it was common to brush through your curls, which it just feels so weird to me, but that was so they could get that typical 1940s style of their hair kind of folding into one big curl. So that's what I'm going to do before I leave the house. And in the 1940s, they absolutely loved a side parting. And I'm talking a deep side parting. So I'm going to do that next. In the 1940s, there was also a political movement called Beauty is Your Duty, which encouraged women to take pride in their appearance to boost the morale of the community. And while that may seem a bit controversial, women loved taking pride in their appearance in the 1940s, but it wasn't just about like makeup and hair. They would talk about the way that you were as a person. They would say things like poise is a mindset, and if you were a kind, approachable person, you would instantly appear more appealing. For makeup in the 1940s, it was very simple and very natural, but they did have a few little tricks if they weren't able to get hold of certain types of makeup. For example, they would use coal ash or soot as eyeshadow. And of course, red lipstick was a big thing because of the whole victory red thing that was going on in the 1940s at the time. So wearing a red lip was kind of like a statement of power. I'm just going to keep it very simple today and add a red lip a bit later. So my makeup is done. All I need to do is my red lipstick, of course, and then let my hair down and get dressed. And today is a Sunday, so I'm going to be going to work because sometimes you would have to work at the office if needs be, extra on a weekend. But I'm also going to be going to church, so I'm going to wear my Sunday best today.
Now there's a little story about red lipstick because allegedly Adolf Hitler hated red lipstick. And that's because the Aryan ideal was a pure, unscrubbed face. And ladies that visited Hitler's country retreat were actually given a little list of things that they must not do. They must not use excessive cosmetics, they must not wear red lipstick, and under no circumstances were they to paint their nails. Well, in defiance of this, American cosmetic companies created lipsticks in shades of Victory Red and Montezuma Red. And they even made it a mandatory part of the uniform for the US Women's Army. I've never heard a petty power move more glorious than that. And then I leave the house to catch the bus for work. I work as a girl clerk in a wartime organisation. No further information is supplied by the War Office, and most of my day is filled with filing. I work Monday to Friday between 10 a.m. and 6 p.m. But as I said, if there is a rush of work, I will work a Saturday and Sunday as well. After work, I have a stroll down the high street on my way to the butcher to collect my meat ration for the week. Here you can see the food ration allowed for one adult during World War II. And believe me, it isn't a lot. And if there were no eggs available for your one egg allowance, then you would use powdered eggs instead. And because of this small amount, government schemes like Dig for Victory were so vital during World War II. And then I headed for Sunday Mass and returned home.
So I've changed out of my Sunday best and donned a much more typical 1940s dress. It's still pretty, but a lot more casual. And I've consulted my World War II ration recipe book to decide what kind of meal I'd like to cook for my husband. And I've chosen some wartime fish cakes.
So today is a special day as I'm expecting my naval husband to arrive home on leave. So after donning my apron, I begin preparing my fish cakes, and it asks for a pound of potatoes, which is about 16 ounces on my vintage Salter weighing scales. I heard a rumour that as a cook during World War II, it was recommended that you try and feed your family a pound of potatoes a day per person. Does anybody know if that was actually true? It does make sense because potatoes are so filling, but I just wondered if there was any backing to that. And unfortunately, I don't have any carrots for this recipe, so I'm probably going to serve it with mushy peas instead. The key ingredient to any wartime recipe is making the meal go as far as possible with limited ingredients. And actually, with only 2 potatoes and a very small amount of cod, this meal did go pretty far because I was able to make 4 good-sized fish patties out of this. And where people would usually add a bit of flour or egg wash or maybe a bit of margarine, I'm just sticking with breadcrumbs. And then it says 20 minutes in the oven on gas mark 4. The Ministry of Food encourage people to cook their entire meal in the oven as a way to save fuel. And while my evening meal is cooking, I settle down to do a spot of knitting. But women would also enjoy sewing, reading, or listening to the wireless of an evening. I then set the table in preparation for the evening meal, and of course I went all out because I haven't seen my husband in a good few months. And then dinner is done, a hearty, carb-fueled meal, and I'm pretty chuffed with how these turned out because I've never made fish cakes before, let alone wartime fish cakes. And then before I know it, there's a knock at the door and my husband has arrived home on leave with a beautiful box of chocolates for me. And I'm just so excited to see him because it's been a really long time and I've missed him a lot. The only other thing that people would tend to do is make up a bunk in the air raid shelter in the cellar of their home. Now, I don't have a cellar, and so I'm making a bunk up in our outhouse. This is because it was always recommended to be ready for a bombing raid that may happen during the night. Of course, this is only a snippet of wartime civilian life, but they deserve just as much praise and respect for pushing through such a terrifying time in our history with a resilient attitude of keep calm and carry on.